Welcome to another episode of Fantasy Nuts with Ryan Almond. This is my late season trades fantasy playoff strategy video. I play on 3 different fantasy platforms, and all of my trade deadlines are in between November 20th and November 25th. Over here, we have the easiest defenses versus the run. When making this list of easy defenses on the run, I took most into consideration the last 4 weeks and rest of season, because the first 4 weeks of the season were rough. There was no preseason. Teams needed to get their legs underneath them. You had things like Dak Prescott going down, completely altering teams. These are the teams that have given up the most yards per game on average on the ground. Over here on the week 14, 15, and 16 grid are the teams you want running backs from in the fantasy playoffs. Any team that has more than one good matchup is highlighted, with San Fran being the leader of 3 good matchups. It would be a bright idea to pick up any of these guys down in the light bulb: Mostert, Henry, Mixon, Montgomery, Sanders, and Elliott. These are the defenses you do not want your running backs playing in the fantasy playoffs, especially Tampa Bay, New Orleans, and Indy. Once again, I've highlighted any team that has more than one bad matchup on this one. The players in this light bulb I would call the not so bright ideas. Very bad playoff schedule for Dalvin Cook. Uh, Hunt and Chubb also have a bad playoff schedule. They get Baltimore in 15, and then they get the Giants in 15. Antonio Gibson has San Fran in 14 and Seattle in 15. Seattle is quietly becoming a good run defense. They give it up through the air, but not the run. Chase Edmonds has Giants in 14, San Fran in 16. So these are your fantasy playoff running backs. Trade for these guys, trade away these guys. Raheem Mostert I like a lot because he's got 3 good matchups, and he's going to be a little bit cheaper to get because he's been injured, and he's been injured twice. I wouldn't sell the farm on any of these guys except for Derrick Henry on the trade fours. You should be able to acquire any of them cheaper because of their injury history, especially from teams who are maybe a little bit down and out and need players right now. Get those guys from them for cheaper. Trade away Hunt, Chubb. I'm big on trading them away because Chubb is about to come back. He's going to cut Hunt's workload, and then they both have bad matchups in the fantasy playoffs. Yeah, I would ditch both those Browns running backs right now. And then, Antonio Gibson, he's a little banged up right now. Chase Edmonds has Drake coming back, so you're not going to get as much in return for those guys. But their fantasy playoff schedule is so bad, I would get rid of Gibson and Edmonds for, whatever you can get for them in the next week. Go for it. Dobbins and Edwards, you're not going to get much for them if you have them, so maybe just hold them. CEH has some pretty bad matchups in the fantasy playoffs, so I would try to trade him away. If you can't get enough for him, I would just keep him and grin and bear it. But Dalvin Cook with his 500 yards from scrimmage for the last couple of weeks, you're going to get a moon for Dalvin Cook. You can probably get like Derrick Henry or Alvin Kamara and trade one of your receivers for a receiver upgrade. That's what I would be doing right now. If you had Dalvin Cook, you should go look at the team who's got Derrick Henry or Alvin Kamara, and then trade them one of your receivers that has a bad playoff schedule for one of those running backs and a receiver with a good playoff schedule. That's my recommendation. Next up, we have pass catchers. We have the easiest defense versus the pass. These defenses give up the most yards per game through the air, starting with Seattle on down. And here we have the grid, my playoff grid, week 14 through 16. Again, teams that have multiple good matchups are highlighted. Starting off, we got the Jets playing Seattle. Seattle gives it up to the air more than any other team. Jets also have Cleveland there in week 16, so I'm high on Crowder because of that. And the Chargers, the Chargers are in shootouts every week. I love Herbert. I love Keenan Allen. I'm not big on Henry, but I'd take him too in the fantasy playoffs because Atlanta gives it up to tight ends and they're week 14, and then Vegas is pretty bad on tight ends. They're week 15. Yeah, I want Allen and Henry and Herbert, but Herbert costs a little too much. I wouldn't trade for him right now. Mark Andrews and Marquise Brown, you can get those guys in the cheap right now. They have been doing a whole lot of nothing lately, and Baltimore has Cleveland, Jacksonville, Giants in the playoffs. That's a pretty juicy schedule for pass catchers right there. Gronk and the Bucks wide receivers. That's very crowded with those Bucks wide receivers, but they have a great schedule in the playoffs with Minnesota and Atlanta in week 14, 15. So you can get a lot of them for cheaper. I kind of like Evans because I think Evans If he doesn't get injured before the end of the year, which he likes to do, I think he could be a great fantasy playoff receiver, and you can get him for dirt cheap right now. I definitely want Gronk if you need a tight end, though. Gronk in the fantasy playoffs should do very well. Indianapolis tight ends, if one of them, leads the pack by the end of the season, pick him off the wire. You don't have to trade for that one. Pittman, watch him too, because I didn't know who else to put because Indy doesn't really throw to receivers. So, I guess I don't really want Indy receivers, even though they have good matchups. Jamison Crowder, if he's healthy, he is a great receiver to have in the fantasy playoffs. Because he's been injured, you could get him for cheap. These are the pass catchers versus toughest defenses. These are receivers you do not want for your fantasy playoffs. And I'm a big Seattle fan, but they are one of the worst offenders here. Week 15, 16, that's my semifinal and my championship week. And they've got Washington and LA who give up the least yards through the air. If I had DK or Lockett right now, I would trade them. Sadly, I would, especially DK. He's worth a lot right now, and his fantasy playoff schedule is crap. Chark might be a good one to trade after his big breakout week last week. He's got Baltimore in week 15 and he's got Chicago in week 16. Those are not good matchups for receivers. Fuller and Cooks both are on the rise, but their fantasy playoff schedule sucks. So squeeze as most out of them as you can. Trade them away. Ayuk and Deebo Samuel. I would definitely be trading away Brandon Ayuk right now because Deebo's going to come back and cut into his workload, and they have a terrible fantasy playoff schedule. Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson. Lately, Dalvin Cook is cutting into their workload, so their trade value is probably down a little bit. Jefferson being the rookie, he might get a little more in the trade market, but their fantasy playoff schedule is terrible, and it's time to trade them away. I really like Jefferson. It pains me to say that. It's time to trade him away. Boyd and Higgins. I'm not as worried about Boyd and Higgins because since he throws the ball a lot. And here's your fantasy playoff pass catchers. You have your trade for on the left and your trade away on the right. My biggest receivers to trade for are Crowder, Robinson, and Keenan Allen. My biggest tight ends to trade for are Andrews, Gronk, and Henry. My biggest tradeaways with his recent spike in value is DJ Chark. DK Metcalf is very highly valuable. Fuller and Cooks, Ayuk, pretty much that whole tradeaway column. Well, maybe not Boyd or Higgins, but everybody else in that tradeaway column. This method works the best if you have a 6-3 record or better. You can afford to give away a little bit better star to get those people with the better fantasy playoff schedules now. But also, if you're in the middle of the pack, say you're like 4-5, you can use those people with the good fantasy schedules to get a little better player in the meantime to try to get you into the playoffs. So it does work both ways. I know I'm nuts for saying trade Cook, but seriously, if you can get like Kamara and Keenan Allen or Derrick Henry and Allen Robinson, and you're giving up Cook and I don't know, maybe Jefferson or Cook and like Ayuk, do it. Well, good luck. I hope you make it to the playoffs and have a great season.